Hello, Madam Manju Nichani. Good morning.
How are you, Vibhuti?
Fine.
Enjoyed this.
Nice to see
Such
you.
enjoyed
Yeah.
Welcome, Manju.
Oh, Dr. Professor Gurpreet Bal is also there. Very good. Yeah. Hello. Good
Hi,
morning,
Gulshan.
Professor Bal. Yeah.
Hi, Manju. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for coming in,
I
and
know.
thank you for assisting us in liaisoning with Dr. Patel. After
Yeah.
so
Dr.
many years, I was
Santwani.
telling her I
Yeah.
began with her because at the beginning of my career as principal, and now at the fag end again.
So nice. So nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Santwani. Hello. Yeah. Yeah, very good. You were the first one to organize conference on new,
Yes, yes,
national
yes.
education policy in the month
Yes,
of
so it
May.
was a good
Yeah, that time.
beginning.
That time it was draft. Now it is policy. Yeah.
Yes.
That time it was draft. Yeah, correct.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll begin with the session.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of St. Mira's College and the Department of Sociology, I welcome you all to this today's webinar on gender implications of new education policy 2020. I heartily welcome Professor Vibhuti Patel and express my sincere gratitude for accepting our invitation to speak on such a pertinent topic. And just now she said that this is the first webinar on gender implications. So thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us this opportunity. I request our principal, Dr. Gulshan Girwani, to address the participants. Ma'am, please.
Good morning, everyone. It is really a privilege for us to first, this generation of ours to witness a new education policy. It has come in after so many years, and it's a need that has been felt for so very long. It's also a privilege that we are hosting a webinar on the gender implications of new education policy. We are a college for women founded with the vision of our founder who believed in women empowerment long before it became fashionable to speak about women empowerment. In fact, on one occasion, he said, I don't really like the use of the word empowerment because power smacks of authority, it smacks of arrogance. What he envisioned was uplifting women, and how very important it is that we are speaking about this aspect under the new education policy. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that years ago, when maybe about 15 years ago or maybe 20 years ago, when I was speaking to my class on management, and I was telling them, please try and describe the CEO of an organization. Please describe. What are the qualities? How do you visualize a CEO? And they all came up with various kinds of qualities of a company CEO. And then I asked them, can you imagine and tell me that when you visualize this person, what is the gender of the CEO? And they all said
Ma'am,
in unison that it
ma'am,
is a
just 1 minute.
male. Yes.
You will have to
Some people will have
centrally
Yeah,
to switch
please
off
mute.
their mic.
please mute yourself because we are not able to hear the proceedings. I request
No, I
everybody
think
to please mute
Can we
yourself.
request all the participants to please mute their mics?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am, please.
Thank you. So they all said that when they visualize a company's CEO, it is a male. And then I said, what about the secretary? And they all said that it
हमें ऐसे अच्छा लगता है हमें वो तो जो है
Sir, please mute yourself. Yeah, please. We request all to please mute yourself. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Gulshan ma'am, please unmute yourself. Gulshan ma'am.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, 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 we can.
So as I was recalling that when I spoke in class 15 years ago, when I was teaching them management, I realized that they all, when they think of a CEO, the gender is a male. When they think of a company secretary, somebody who has to assist the CEO, the gender is a female. And today when I asked my students the same question, the answers are typically the same. So we really need to do something about changing the mindset of women so that they are visible in leadership roles. And more than mindset, I think mindset is set already. What we need is a mind flex. We need to have flexible minds so that we see ourselves in leadership roles as much as we see the other gender in leadership roles. And I hope this new education policy has been able to address this issue. And I'm so happy that we have none other than Mrs. Dr. Vibhuti Patel, who is going to enlighten us through her insights on this very, very important topic for us. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us. I would also like to formally thank Dr. Manju Nichani, who has herself been a very empowered person, an alumnus of St. Mira's College, and who helped us in getting the very right resource person for this very valuable webinar for us. Thank you, Manju ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Today, in the light of COVID-19, we are facing a lot of challenges as far as teaching, learning practices are concerned. And we all are struggling and managing and somewhat mastering the art of digital learning. But it leaves us with so many questions, especially the issue of all-inclusive learning and various barriers in terms of caste, class, gender play a very important role when it comes to inclusive education system. While new education policy promises and guarantees many things and much needed overhauling of the system, it also poses huge challenges when seen from the gender lens. It has become a need of the time to analyze and understand the gender implications of the policy if we are looking at education as all-inclusive. The new education policy talks about gender inclusion funds, girls' mobility, rationalizing distances, which probably is one of the main reasons for increasing dropout rates amongst girl children. So while the mainstream understanding gives us a very positive picture of the changes, gender lens may help us to look at the hidden implications. It is the need of the time to comprehend the new education policy in totality and in gender-specific context as well, to understand its implications on women, their education, and their employment chances. From this point of view, we are sure that this webinar will throw light on the ambiguities we all are facing and imagining. We are indeed very fortunate and privileged to have Professor Vibhuti Patel with us to present her insights on this topic. Professor Patel doesn't need any introduction. However, it is always a pleasure to introduce eminent scholars like Professor Patel. Dr. Vibhuti Patel, she worked as Professor, Advanced Center for Women's Studies, School of Development Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, and recently retired from the post. She also worked as Director of Postgraduate Studies and Research, which is a cluster of 16 PG departments of Social Sciences, Humanities, and Fine Arts and also as Director, Center for Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusion Policy while she was working at SMBT. Professor Vibhuti Patel is an eminent economist from the University of Mumbai. She was awarded visiting fellowship to the London School of Economics and Political Science from Association of Commonwealth Universities, UK. She has authored and co-authored 12 books, edited and co-edited 9 books, and contributed over 100 papers as chapters in various books edited by others. She has also authored and co-authored 34 research monographs and reports. Her research papers, comments, commentaries, and reviews have been published in the national as well as international academic journals. She has received many prestigious awards. Currently, she is a board of member of School of Gender and Development Studies of Indira Gandhi Open University, IGNOU. She has been board member of School of Gender and Development Studies, as a member of Expert Committee on School of Gandhian Thought, board member of School of Extension and Development Studies for IGNOU. She was a member of Advisory Board of Department of Women Studies of NCERT, Delhi. She also worked as an expert committee member for Mission for Empowerment of Women in Science and Technology, BSc, Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India, Delhi. She prepared base paper on gender for Mumbai Human Development Report 2010, Maharashtra Human Development Report 2012, and MMRDA Human Development Report 2012 for Government of Maharashtra. And the list goes on. We couldn't think of a more competent person than Professor Patel to speak on the gender implications of new education policy. Her experience in the field of gender, right from school education to the higher education, is very, very important for us. And I invite Professor Patel to share her valuable insights on the topic. Before ma'am starts, there are just few announcements. I request everybody to please mute yourself because there is so much of background noise and we won't be able to hear ma'am. So please mute yourself. Please switch off your videos in order to manage the bandwidth, and send your questions in chat box. So we will be taking up all the questions after ma'am presents her deliberations. Over to you, ma'am. Welcome to St. Miraz, and we are eagerly waiting for your address. Thank you. Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
So from the beginning, I start? Okay.
Yeah.
So, very good morning to one and all. I see so many of my known friends and colleagues and seniors who are present here, and it is really a humbling experience. I would first of all like to thank Dr. Manju Bichani and Dr. Gulshan Gidwani for choosing this topic of gender implications. And we must put on record that this is the first national level webinar on discussing the National Education Policy 2020 with a gender lens. There have been several, like more than 50, 60 webinars and panel discussions on National Education Policy have taken place since the month of July, so and last 90 days. So this is very important. I would like to greet Dr. Sarla Santwani, who was the first one to organize this thing when it was at a draft stage. She had organized a webinar inviting 3 vice chancellors and me, Professor Sujit Datta, Dr. Lata Pujari, coordinator of Sophia Center, Women's Studies Center, and Professor Gurpreet Pal, and so many other, Dr. Meena Kute. I just can say that I know so many of my colleagues are here. So it is, I have a PowerPoint presentation and I would like to share. window screen, no? Select window or screen, no?
Yes, ma'am. You can select desktop also.
Yeah. Is it, can you see it?
No.
You can't see it?
Yeah, now we can see it. Yeah,
You
we
can see
can.
it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I have to open it. No? Yeah. If it is full screen, then also you can see it. Yeah. Excuse me. Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. You can go to the full screen.
Yeah.
We will be able to see them. Yeah.
Okay. So national education policy, right from the time, like in last 2 years, when it was at a draft stage also, there were several roundtables which had taken place. There was, for the citizens, they could only give the, ask the explanatory questions. So a lot of decision and visioning had already been pre-decided. And after that, in several roundtables, several suggestions came up. Some of them were included in the policy when it was declared in 2020 July. The national education policy, as you know, the constitution of committee itself is very interdisciplinary. We had scientists, educationists, mathematicians, social scientists, tribal studies expert, education administration expert, minority studies, knowledge commission, people from knowledge commission, national knowledge commission, and also MHRD, which has to do the go into the modalities and infrastructure and logistics of the national implementation of the policy. So this is a very comprehensive policy, and which strives for academic excellence from early childhood education till the postdoctoral research. So I think focus on early childhood education is very, very important. It emphasizes integrating vocational education in all schools, colleges, and universities. And it also highlights the need for adult education, promotion of Indian languages, that is a unique aspect, that the emphasis is on development of regional languages, and also transformative education. So education is for social transformation. It borrows a lot from the community college model of USA. So where, what are the needs of the community, and accordingly you tweak your educational content so that those who come out of these institutions, they are useful to the community. So the main, say, salient features of National Education Policy 2020. First, it promises universal access from pre-primary to grade 12. That means the promise which India had in the Millennium Development Goal and Sustainable Development Goal, goal number 2, that they are talking about, targeting to achieve 100% gross enrollment ratio in school education by 2030. Early childhood education is given a great emphasis, and education for all children between 3 and 6, 2025. By 2025, replacing 10 plus 2 with 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. And you know that so many state governments have already sent the GR to include 5th standard to take it to the primary. So so after 5 years in pre-primary, students to aim at enhanced skill in new pedagogical system. And also National Mission for Foundational Literacy. Foundational literacy has been emphasized very, very repeatedly in the document, and also the numeracy. So for foundational literacy and numeracy, there's a focus on early language and mathematical skills from grade 1st to 3rd. That means by 2025. Multilingualism and power of language. So medium of instruction till the class 5 should be mother tongue, preferably till 8 to 8.
Bhuti ma'am,
Yeah.
the slides are not being moved.
Okay.
Are you moving the slides?
Not now, not now.
Oh,
Then
okay.
there is a massive input in the examination reform, and I think most of you who are working in educational institution know more about it. Currently, the changes that are coming back. And new National Assessment Center, which is called PARAK, that is a very important for the standard setting of the assessment of students pan-India, so that there is a comparability, and equitable and inclusive education. I think that has been said even in the previous 1986 education policy also. Teacher recruitment and career path. So investment in teacher in terms of academic excellence, and national professional standards for teacher, NPST, to be developed by 2022. So within 2 years now we will have NPST. Standard setting and accreditation of school education, the way we have accreditation of colleges, now the similarly rigorous standard setting for school education and also vocational education. By 2025, at least 50% of students to have exposure to vocational education. So that is what we say. Now, Ministry of Human Resource Development is now Ministry of Education, and it has a task force of a school education, multi-stream flexibility, diluted boards, then multilingualism, and also bagless days. So the load of which the students have to carry, that should be reduced, and also the entrance exams, the kind of new architecture or the structure which they have created, and also going local, that the globalization is a fait accompli, but you have to be rooted in your local reality. That is very important. This policy is based on the TSR Subramaniam Committee report of 2016, which was submitted to the Prime Minister office, and which entrusted with the preparation of new education policy. And Indian education, it talks about the Indian education service should be established by the state government. So that is one important recommendation it had given. Outlay on education should be 6%. That was the mandate even the Kothari Commission had recommended way back in 1966. And it also had said that so many private and trust-run or religious institution-run institutions also should be supported by the state. So that's how we got the whole concept of aided colleges and aided schools way back in the 60s, late 60s. So that is now the promise is the current investment in education in India is 2.8% of GDP, which is very low. And right from the United Nations and also UNESCO Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goal have asked all the nation states to invest minimum 6, but in looking at the current COVID-19 situation, where a lot of online education, platform-based education is there, so we need to even invest in education technology. And so 2 or 3 state governments have even promised to invest 10% in the current year. And I think Delhi is the only state which has currently matched the promise. Minimum eligibility condition with 50% marks at the graduate level for entry to existing B.Ed courses. So teacher entrance test, TET, is compulsory for recruitment of all teachers, and also center and state should jointly lay down norms and standards for the TET. And here I think so many state governments, they have said that some of the states may face problems because the standards vary from state to state. A compulsory licensing and certification for teachers in government and private schools should be made mandatory, with provision for renewal of every 10 years. So that is now this thing. And preschool education for children in the age group of 4 to 5 should be declared as a right, and the program for its implementation immediately. So these were the recommendations which are reflected in the current policy. It is also the no detention policy must be continued for young children. This is another bone of contention, and a lot of controversy has taken place. At the upper primary stage, the system of detention should be restored, subject to provision of remedial coaching, and also at least 2 extra chances being offered to prove the capability of the student in higher classes. On demand board exam, now here the use of his capability, that is a controversial, because where are her? So you see in certain parts of the document, you see gender blindness, because student is perceived as a boy, not a girl. So that also is a very, very problematic area. On-demand board exam should be introduced to offer flexibility and also reduce here, as Madam said, that what we need is a flexibility and reduce the stress of students. National level tests open to every student who has completed 12th standard. Midday meal should be extended to cover students of secondary school also, because we know that the studies on nutrition in India have shown that adolescent boys and adolescent girls, both of them have a major problem of nutrition, because the growth takes place at such a fast rate in that age group, adolescent group. So midday meal will be extended to secondary school. And UGC, hello?
Sorry to interrupt you. Some people are asking that slides are not moving. So I just want to confirm from you that you are not yet using PPT, no?
Yeah, I'm using the PPT.
No, but then it's not moving, ma'am. So
I'm in six number, slide number 6. So
But we can't operate. It's only you have to operate.
yeah, I am operating. I am at slide number 6.
No, we are looking at only the first slide. We can see that. We are
TSR
not-
Subramaniam committee report. You can't see.
No, 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 ma'am. We couldn't see earlier slides also. So,
Now what to do?
you want?
You have to go to slideshow, ma'am.
Yeah, slideshow.
Please
I
go to
have gone to slideshow
slideshow.
only. I have gone to slideshow only, madam.
Ma'am, then can you just stop presenting and again resume? That
Okay,
will
I-
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Now is it visible? If I don't go for full screen, is it visible?
No,
No, it is full screen. It's not full screen actually.
That's what I
It is not full
Did not.
screen. It has to
Yeah.
be set at slideshow.
did slideshow.
Yeah,
Okay.
now we can see. Yeah, now
At
we
the
can
bottom?
see second, yeah.
No, no.
Slideshow.
At the
This is slide.
bottom,
Huh?
there is a icon which says slideshow. We should not be able to see the slides on the side, the icons. We should only see the slide you're presenting.
At the
Ma'am,
bottom.
that icon is next to notes, fourth icon. From notes, you can see that small.
At the bottom, at the bottom.
Turn on caption. You are presenting. Then
No, there's a
I think-
slideshow option.
The fourth icon, ma'am, from notes.
The icon is
one?
there both at the top and at the bottom of your
That's
screen.
what I did. Yeah, that I have been doing. That's what I have been done. Fourth one I have done. Is it visible now?
No, then you can go
It's
to
visible, but it's visible along with your slides on the side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
ma'am,
it should be just the slide you're presenting. Vaishali, can you present on ma'am's behalf? You have the slide show now.
Okay.
Ma'am,
Can you
shall I-
do that? Yeah.
Should I
Yeah.
unshare?
Can you present, please? Yes, she will do the slide share.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, then
Yeah.
I'll just close this.
Yeah.
Okay. And now I will go. I have to do. Stop
Vaishali
presenting.
can do the slide share. Yes, yes,
I have
yes,
done. Okay.
yes, yes. Sorry, ma'am. Sorry to
It's
interrupt
okay.
you.
Yeah. Sometimes it
So
happens.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Correct.
You were speaking about it so passionately. It was
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
sounding right to interrupt you. Yes.
Yeah. So is it good?
Can everyone see the PPT?
Huh?
No, Vaishali, no. We can see your desktop actually. Yes, now, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now go to the concerned slide, huh? The slide
Yeah.
number.
Slide number 6. This I finished.
This is fine.
Yes, Subramaniam report.
Yes,
also I
yes,
finished.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So midday meal, I was at midday meal, and then they
Yes.
said that there should be, yeah. Okay. So now, yeah. Can you move now?
Yes. Go to the next, Vaishali.
So the after that there is also like previous one. Yeah. So UGC Act must be allowed to lapse. That is one thing, and also 200 foreign universities. The previous one. Oh my God, it's creating so much. I think I opened
Sixth
my.
one? Yeah. This is the sixth one.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 minute. Let me open my. Okay. So, the top 200 universities from abroad, they should be allowed to open campuses in India and give the same degree which is acceptable in India. So that means there is going to be more competition for our country. because now we will have to globalize our education, and that's what policy is also demanding. When the part two of the national education policy is about the school education, which is focusing on mainly the curriculum, and the flexibility in curriculum is the main mantra of this. And it also talks about the efficient resourcing and also effective governance, which I think earlier policies had also talked about. But the most distinguishing feature of this policy is the importance of regional language. And it also says that child is always a multilingual, and if we start at an early childhood, then children, the two language form, they suggested three language formula, English and Hindi at link languages, and also the mother tongue. And it is refreshing to see that instead of using vernacular that we all know, vernac is a Latin word signifying the meaning is slave. So language of the slave is a vernacular. So generally, those who are against colonialism and against this kind of language which signifies inequality, we generally don't use. We call it either regional language or mother tongue. And another very important feature of this policy is that there is acknowledgement of madrasa, gurukul, and homeschooling, which is quite revolutionary so far as the policy is concerned. Part two of the policy, which talks about the framework of quality universities and colleges. So there is the main, which is highly debated currently, that there is a multiple entry and multiple exit in the so far as the college education is concerned. So after completion of first year, a student gets certificate. After completion of second year, student gets diploma, and after completion of third year, student gets pass course. And after completion of one more year, that means a 4-year bachelor's degree, you get honors. So bachelor's with honors. And it also emphasizes lifelong learning, which is anytime, anywhere, and anything. So optimum learning environment and the support for students by introduction of innovative and responsive curriculum and pedagogy that it demands. Curriculum and pedagogy for enhancing access and opportunities for lifelong learning, that you can upskill, you can reskill, and you can also, the futuristic technology, the interactive boards or education technology, there is a great emphasis on education technology. And also it talks about the internationalization of higher education, and also putting faculty back into the heart of educational institutions. That is very important. The focus of the policy and that of giving a student basic computing skills, coding, research is greatly emphasized in the policy, creation of virtual labs, and also the outreach. No? So now with this kind of a salient features and the broad framework, let us see what is the education scenario. I think everyone will have to move. I'm echoing. Yeah. So Ministry of Education has given the data that currently we have 799 universities, 39,071 colleges, and 11,920 standalone colleges in our country, if we go by the AISHE report, All India the Higher Education report. State universities are 399, deemed to be universities are 126, central universities are 48, and we have very big this thing over after 1991, we have more and more private universities. There was a time when there was only one private university, Manipal, but now we have 334 private universities. Now, RUSA, which was launched by the government, National Higher Education Campaign, which talked about the reduction in the gap between education and research, promotion of multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in research. And we all must remember that India adopted right to education 10 years, 12 years back. And because of the universalization of primary education, all of us who are all the working people in India pay 2% of professional tax. And we have a huge corpus of fund on Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Now, all these students who were enrolled in Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan some 10, 12, 15 years back, they are the ones now they are knocking at the door of higher education. So Knowledge Commission, National Knowledge Commission had already said that India needs 1,500 universities, okay? But currently we have 799 universities to meet the challenge of the aspiring class of students who are now want to be in the university. So one is when the policy also talks about the common syllabus, that 50% of syllabus in all the disciplines should be focusing on building better human being. That means value education, talk about ethics, morality. Then it also talks about clustering of colleges. That means affiliating power to only those institutions that will be offering multiple degrees. So if you are a single degree college, then you will have to affiliate with the cluster college campus. Internship with industry, artisan and craftsmen. So that is also very important. It is not only Fortune 500 companies which will get the interns, but even the traditional art. And we have a very strong craft-based economy in rural India and even in the tribal India. So that there also students can enroll. Questioning by the naysayers, some of the people who have very strongly critiqued national education policy is that what about the, you are talking only about the private ownership and private dispensation. What about the unserved communities? What about those who are pushed out, officially classified as dropped out, but they are actually pushed out because of the socioeconomic condition? And privatization is linked with user fee. And there is a large proportion of Indian students who can't afford this kind of a highly priced education. So the recommendation of National Education Policy is also replacing University Grants Commission and AICTE with a Higher Education Commission of India. So the way we have a National Commission for Agriculture, National Commission for Scheduled Caste, National Commission for Scheduled Tribe, same National Commission for Women, we will have a National Commission for Higher Education. Opening up of Indian higher education to foreign players, yes, that is very important feature. Reintroduction of 4-year multidisciplinary bachelor's program, flexibility to institutions to offer different designs of master's programs. So I think the cluster universities, so there'll be 3 types of universities. I'm coming to that, and what kind of the new programs they can afford, tailor-made programs according to the need of the community. Discontinuation of MPhil program, because now research methodology as the subject has come, is included both at a bachelor's and also master's program. Always have at least minimum 1 paper on research methodology, and setting up of National Research Foundation. That is a very important area, because that National Research Foundation aims at energizing and engaging and making the capable faculty, and this funding the research proposals through rigorous peer review, building research capacity of all universities and colleges, and creating beneficial linkages among government, industry, researcher. So I think whatever research you are doing, it should not be esoteric ivory tower research, but it has to contribute to the national growth, national development, and development of the community. Recognizing the outstanding research funded by National Research Foundation through awards and national seminars, this thing. And it also aims to restore integrity to teacher education, move teacher education into multidisciplinary colleges and universities, and also upgradation of professional education, and also promote education technology in a teaching learning efforts by setting up National Education Technology Forum. That is a new feature that you can see in the previous education policy. This kind of a focus on technology was not so enhanced. Department of Science and Technology and Indian Council of Social Science Research, like funding agencies, will continue to fund the in addition to NRF. So we will have a National Research Foundation, plus the earlier role of DST and ICSSR will continue. They will not be touched. Major issues of the debate, like first we see is that policy has recommended replacement of UGC with National Higher Education Regulatory Authority. That is more and more centralization of higher education, because the decision-making power, agenda-setting power will be with NHERA, a National Higher Education Regulatory Authority, which will monitor 3 types of units. So all the university education, higher education will be divided into 3 types of universities, 3 types of educational institutions. One is research universities. They will be focusing only on research. Type 2 will be teaching universities. They would be they would focus only on teaching. And type 3 university will be called teaching colleges. So there can be cluster colleges, and all types of institutions will have a B.Ed. So 4-year program to link higher education with school education. And also, so the separation of higher education for school education is now done away with in this national education policy. Human Development Resource Cell will be merged with universities and will be multidisciplinary in nature. And National Research Foundation will have the power to grant competitive funding. So the way when we bid any international research project, any big highly funded research project, you do the bidding. Even for the UN, currently UN or any international organization, everywhere the bidding process is there. So same thing will happen. So competitive bidding for outstanding research proposal across the discipline will happen, and even private institutions will be allowed to bid for the projects. There will be, so it is not that only if you have a 2F12B that you are allowed to apply for the funding, but even private institutions can do it. There will be common examination for MBBS at the final stage of exit, also as national eligibility cum entrance test. So NEET will be is institutionalized, and currently I think they are also preparing for that. A National Higher Education Regulatory Authority shall be sole regulator for higher education, and also massive open online courses, the MOOCs, which I think many of the colleges and universities have started using it over last 15 years, and even NAC demands anytime a NAC visit takes place, they ask, are you using open and distance learning sources, MOOC sources? So I think that is very important. The recognition of NAC, recognition by NAC will be in terms of only yes and no, instead of grading. So currently you have a 4-point grading, and how there is a cutthroat competition between the colleges, whether you got a 3.2 or 3.3, and who is superior, who is inferior. That kind of a competition is done away with. Whether you are eligible, you are recognized by NAC, or you are not recognized by NAC. So the levels will be introduced between assistant, associate, and professor cadre, and board will be constituted to grant autonomy to colleges in all 3 types of teaching university, research university, and teaching colleges. When it comes to regulatory structures and mechanism, the policy is more in favor of centralization of governance in education, and it also recommends common regulatory system across the country. And policy acknowledges the special needs of the marginalized, poor, SC, ST, OBC, minorities, and persons with disability, at least in terms of platitude, in terms of abstractions and generalization, policy is sensitive to it. But in terms of modalities, how they are going to give the level playing field to people who are in the marginalized and socially excluded community, what kind of concrete inclusive policy that different state governments will, that is, I think that is left to the state governments, and policy has not clearly mentioned that. But does it offer concrete steps in terms of affirmative action of the state? What kind of affirmative actions, whether it is in terms of quota, whether it is in terms of freeship, whether it is in terms of more scholarships and fellowships, or creation of a learning center, the rural areas, the rural colleges, because now so many state universities have a rural-based affiliated colleges. Are you going to create learning centers so that they also get whatever is the state-of-the-art knowledge? Will it be accessible to people in the rural and tribal area? These are the questioning. But just 3 days back, Professor Vasvi, an anthropologist from Karnataka, she has written an article in Indian Express about them. So the question of education investment is also another very important concern. So the critical reflections on NEP started in last 2 months. We have seen so many points of views have been projected. The NEP has recommended allocation of 6%, which has been accepted by the state also, the government also, and it also has accepted the universalization of primary education. India adopted the moment Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was accepted as a policy. And the national education policy talks about it is geared towards knowledge economy. Knowledge economy is the one that utilizes knowledge to develop and sustain long-term economic growth, and also knowledge economy framework focuses on 4 pillars, which such as they are needed to support successful knowledge economy. So knowledge economy model, which started getting promoted in the 21st century, where what kind of advantage India has? One thing India had advantage, that people, they have a sizable section of Indian educated population which is proficient and fluent in English. So that is one advantage in the era of globalization. And there may be a case of maintaining and even increasing spending on higher education. That is also because currently the focus is on primary education and school education, because that merits. In the white paper, if you see Ambari Birla white paper, which was submitted in 2004 to the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that talked about that school education is can be supported by the state. It is a merit good, because they talk about merit good, public good, and user fee charges. So merit good, where it merits the state intervention, state affirmative action, while you leave higher education to the market and also charge the user fee. So, but National Education Policy recommends the public philanthropic partnership initiative for higher education. So currently we see we have Azim Premji Trust or Tata Trust or so many other Mahindra and Mahindra or so many Fortune 500 companies. They use their CSR fund to support the educational initiative. So that model is being promoted by the National Education Policy. The first pillar of knowledge economy is an economic and institutional regime that is conducive to creation, diffusion, and utilization of knowledge. And it also provides the incentives to encourage use and allocation of existing and new knowledge efficiently. So knowledge doesn't remain only a monopoly of handful of experts, but reaching out, taking the knowledge, democratizing the knowledge is very important. So you need to have an economic environment. You have to create that kind of a transfer, the more and more democratization, so that it reaches and percolates down to aspiring class also. Then second pillar is that of a well-educated and skilled population that creates, shares, and uses knowledge efficiently. We all know that there have been basically two schools of thoughts. Way back in 1964, Gunnar Myrdal, a Nobel laureate Swedish economist, had advised in his book, many of you must be familiar with Asian Drama, 3 volumes he wrote. And what he tells the leaders of the Asian countries, that investment in education is not a luxury, but it is a fundamental necessity of growth. Okay, so if you want a double-digit growth, you need to invest. You need to have a healthy and educated workforce. And unless you invest in your population, unless you invest in your children, how 20 years down the line they are going to contribute to the economy? That was the questioning which has done. That school is called Human Capital Formation School. So you have to invest in your human capital so that economy can reap the benefits. This is called instrumentalist school. We have another school where the John Drace or Amartya Kumar Sen, who say that education is a fundamental right. If any citizenship right to education. So it is a right-based approach. So there also you are saying that every citizen has to be educated, and in today's knowledge economy, education becomes a minimum necessary condition for dignified life. So scientific and engineering field education that is necessary to achieve the technological growth, and a more educated society tends to be more technologically sophisticated and generating higher demand for knowledge. Third pillar of knowledge economy is a dynamic information infrastructure that facilitates communication, dissemination, and processing of information and technology. Here comes the role of education technology, and especially the information and knowledge worldwide, which reduces transaction costs, that is the transaction costs leading to greater communication and productivity and output. Excuse me, I'm getting disturbed. Please mute yourself. Excuse me. So the fourth pillar of knowledge economy is that of an efficient innovation system. So focus on research centers, think tanks, consultants, and those who are extremely gifted educationists. Their knowledge should not remain linked only to their college or their university. We should use the education technology so that they can reach out. And it is not only one particular institution which benefits from their genius, but everyone should get benefit. So that is very important. And here comes the role of MOOCs and online platforms which can be attended by anybody from any part of the world. So generation of technical knowledge leads to productivity growth, and the buzzword is we are all talking about Industry 4.0, future of work, which is marked by heavy use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics. So the national education policy is aware of the current discourses and current concerns in the world economy. So all these four pillars of knowledge economy are interconnected, they are interdependent. So whether it is an economic and institutional regime, educational infrastructure and educational quality, innovation and information infrastructure, so they are very, very important. Now it suggests that to be effective in knowledge economies, we have to have a policy and these appropriate policies also in institutions. We need to have investment, and we should also have a coordination, and we need to finally create an ecosystem that encourages innovation, critical reflection and research. Now let us see the national education policy in the context of India's commitments to Millennium Development Goal, which was there from 2000 and 2015. And now we are in the era of a Sustainable Development Goal from 2015 to 2030. And the fourth goal in Sustainable Development Goals is a quality of education. Now, if you see this chart, you can realize that enrollment of girls, now we come to the gender implications, and enrollment of girls in a primary school, India is boasting about 100%. Okay. Now, what kind of education and quality of education we can debate, but they are enrolled. Okay. But by the time they reach the higher education, we reach the higher education level, 3 out of 4 girls are out of higher education. That means only we have less than 1/4 of Indian girls, 24.5% of girls are in Indian higher education system. So that is a very, very sad scenario. Though numerically we have increased. There was a time where we used to have a 2% or 7%, or UGC talked about 12% by 12th five-year plan we had. But now we are talking about, but still the gender gap in higher education is much, much higher. So equity is a very important concern when it comes to economy of higher education. In a drive for privatization, what we have seen is that women as students are the main losers as parents channelize financial resources for sons' education. Daughters' education is less important. NAC has done a study, National the accreditation body. The study reveals that there is a ghettoization of women in general higher education. Girls are found mostly in arts and commerce, and mostly man-thronged professional colleges of engineering, architect, medicine, science, and technology. We heard a case of a girl in Tamil Nadu who had acquired in all STEM subjects, she had got 100 out of 100. And overall, she had got some 96% marks, and she had to commit suicide because the college that was allocated to her was demanding fees, very high fees, some 10-12 lakhs rupees for a medical admission. Yesterday also we read in a paper 3 girls committed suicide, though in a state board they had an excellent mark. So we can see that the private institutions are totally inaccessible to girls' education. Still, we have mentality when it comes to investing in girls' education, people think that it is watering neighbor's plant. Padosi ke ghar ko pani dena. Padosi ke paudho ko pani dena. That mentality still Indian parents have, even the middle class parents have. When I go to tier 2 or tier 3 cities, okay, and talk about girls' education, during the seminar, they don't say anything, but during the coffee break and lunch break, the girls, they surround me and they tell their horror stories that even they come from a middle class or upper class or affluent class, but the parents would invest only, they would, when capitation colleges, even brother has a less marks, they would give 15 lakhs, 20 lakhs rupees for engineering admission of brother. But this girl, even 800 or 1,000 rupees in a MA program in a state aided universities, that was paid by either they through earn and learn scheme or their teachers had paid their fees. Okay, and I have seen this even when I was working in SNDT Women's University. So many girls, after BA, they would say, parents would say that after 12th only they say that you get married. And we have seen under current lockdown also in last 6 months, so many girls, the child helplines, all the 12th pass girls, they have been forced to get married. And what they want to do is they want higher education, and they have approached the child helpline. 17% rise in the panic calls to the helpline we have experienced. UGC report of 2012 and the FICCI report of 2012 also corroborate this reality. Opportunities for higher education for transgender, because when we talk about the gender implications, we must talk about the transgender community. We don't see gender only in terms of binary of man and women. So transgender community, they are also aspiring for higher education. Currently, we have seen Tata Institute is the only institution in India which provides both the hostel facility as well as the scholarship to transgender students on the campus. SNDT has given admission to 18 transgender students this year under a distance education program. Nirmala Niketan was the first college which had a day scholar from transgender community, and the scholar also demanded a separate toilet. He did not want to use the boys' toilet because of his experience of rape. And he did not want, he would not use girls' toilet because girls would get scared seeing him. So I think the whole education infrastructure has to be sensitive. Currently, there are only 2 states, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, where they have done the census of transgender community. They have come up with the separate budgetary allocation for their higher education. And we have a Chhattisgarh, which has provided some infrastructural facility for the transgender community. So I think it is very important to be sensitive to socially excluded groups such as Dalit, SC, ST, DTNT, religious minorities, and transgender community. Among them, we have seen gender gap is even wider. Okay, very, very. Now, need for a reversal of these trends of exclusion of the marginalized. What we need is a wider access to higher education, a review of appointment and promotion when we are inducting them into as a teacher also. And also affirmative action to favor women's access and participation while awaiting genuine change in attitude towards full gender equality, as I think Dr. Gulshan Gidwani madam also said, that when it comes to principal or a decision maker or CEO, we always think in terms of men. And we have experienced that even just 20 years back, some 30 years back, even in city like Mumbai, they would not allow women to become principal. Nalini Pandit, we know the famous case of renowned economist Dr. Nalini Pandit. She was the senior most teacher in her college. College had played a very progressive role in the 19th century social reform movement for women's education. But when she asked for principalship, when the principal retired, they said, how can we trust 6,000 boys to a woman principal? The same mentality was there even in terms of in universities, like when it came to the position as a dean or a registrar or vice chancellor, they would not accept the woman candidate, even though she was competent and efficiency plus. So the major joke in the university system that women teachers are good as for babysitting. So classroom teaching is considered to be babysitting, and when it comes to academic power in management, managing the institution, it is in the man. And finally, Dr. Armaiti Desai, who was a director of TISS and elevated as a UGC chairperson, she started an affirmative action of women managers in higher education and started picking up industrious, intelligent, hardworking teachers to be ready to become dean and superintendent and registrars and vice chancellors and decision makers and be member of Senate and management council of the universities. So that was a very important intensive 15 days program which UGC had started under 9th, 10th and 11th 5-year plans. Support services are very important in terms of transport, crash, hostel, counseling, bridge courses, and we have 8 types of schemes for empowerment of women in higher education under UGC. Okay, so this, and I think we need this kind of affirmative action needs to be emphasized in the current context. Gender dimensions of the university curriculum, when it comes to the gender binaries, most of the curriculum talks only in terms of gender binary, and it also talks in a very stereotypical role currently also. So I think stimulating role models for women students are required. provide encouragement and build their confidence, the must presence of male dominated careers in. So the national education policy also talks about motivating girls to take interest in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so that they are very, very important. And Karuna Chanana study also shows that how systematically, even very, very intelligent girls from the schools level who have got, say, admission marks in 90%, 95%, they are also discouraged to go to STEM subjects. So I think that the special affirmative action is required. And national education policy also talks about it. Now, since the development theory acknowledges that gender dimension has become a key factor in any solutions proposed for global problem, and currently also we saw that how women decision makers in several countries, they have played important role in combating coronavirus in a very, very dignified way and also humane way. And currently also we all appreciate and we all applaud the work done by the health minister of Kerala or the presidents and prime ministers of several countries who are women, who had a very, very very practical rooted approach of combating the coronavirus. So gender mainstreaming in higher education is a must. That is, in terms of platitude, in terms of promise, it is accepted. Safety of students on the campus, that is also very important concern. So implementation of the safety requirement as per the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. This thing. Now, education as a social infrastructure, I think it's very important that it's an UNDP report also talks about education as a powerful instrument of achieving and sustaining economic growth and reducing poverty and enhancing equity. Equity is very important for equality. So all those sections which are historically neglected, which have been historically not given the level playing field, for them the state has to step in. It is the duty of the state to provide a positive environment in terms of equity, which is very important. So education, human development and capability approach of developing children to be self-governing adults, as I told you about the right-based approach, developing economic participation, developing human flourishing, enhancing the creativity, critical reflection, developing citizens with a sense of justice and reciprocity, and also putting human beings at the center as ends, not as means. So human beings are not some cog in the machine. They are not some nail in the machine. They are the citizens. And that's why we have to enlarge their choices. It's very important. Now, with this kind of a promise, let us see what has been the contribution of our GDP to the goal of higher education. We have seen that from 2004 to 2016, we have seen there has been very, very slow increase, and there is a zigzag in the education budget, and we saw that 2016 budget was 2.68%, so it is less than 3% of the budgetary allocation is there for higher education, and that's why more and more people have to depend on the private education. So even we have in colleges also, because of this, except for teacher salary, you don't get any other things. So most of the time it is the aided departments have to collaborate with the self-supporting departments. So zero budget policy that was introduced after 1991 has created this kind of a scenario. When it comes to, so education as such, budget is 2.8, but when it comes to higher education, you can see these are the NHRD data, that how it has gone down, and we see that this thing. So that now, if you see, excuse me, I'm getting disturbed. Hello. So the spending pattern is very important, and currently let us see the promise of 6% of GDP for education. How much does it come for higher education? And we will all have to very, very vociferously talk about increased budgetary allocation. Now, with this kind of a problem, what we see is that if we see this chart, pink is for women, blue is for boys, and pink is for girls. Now, we see most of the boys and girls, so even boys from the marginalized section, all of them would be in a bachelor's degree, arts, commerce, you would find them. Some of them, around 12% of girls and 10% of boys are in Bachelor of Science. Technology, only the BTech up to, and BTech, when we talk about the Bachelor of Technology, they are basically computer science, okay. Engineering is even less. Master of Arts is only 3.5%. Girls are more, 5.4%. Those who are not married off, they are the ones who join for the master's program, and that too only in arts. But when it comes to Master of Business, Master of Science, Bachelor of Education, we have more women. We have, and when it comes to all the professional courses we have, whether it's a medicine or engineering or technology, this thing we see percentage is going down. Okay, these are the courses which are not affordable. It's only those who are able to pay the user fee, they can go. So this is the kind of a division we have at an undergraduate level. So we see that most of them are undergraduate level. We have 14, like 1 crore 40 lakh boys, and we have 1 crore 24 lakh girls. But by the time they reach postgraduate level, we have 18.5 lakh boys and only 19.6 lakh girls. So we see that how once you rise the education pyramid, people are eliminated. Now, for reversal of this trend, what we need is a more the gender dimension in the university curriculum as well as the entry are both very, very important. Currently, we see that most of the educational institutions have started using educational social media in a big way. So we have wide range of freely available social media, but the problem is how many of them have access. So currently, if we see, only 8% of school children and around 20% of college-going students have access to education technology. And this education technology has open educational resources. We have massive open educational resources. So many universities have also deprivatized their knowledge, and their knowledge sharing platforms have been created. We have an e-PG Pathshala on Umang, where 24,000 courses of our country, they are now the lectures, video lectures, and the notes and the self-study material is available. Ministry of Electronic Information Technology has taken. I think people who are sitting, many participants in this webinar also must have recorded their lectures, and they must be widely used in the areas where people are, they don't have colleges also, they can use it. IGNOU has nearly 54 lakh students in more than 60, 70 countries in the world, English-speaking countries. The many scholars have raised doubts about the national education policy, and they are asking, are we creating a neoliberal citizen who will be foot soldier of the state? Because the LPG policy of India, that India adopted in 1991, has also created had opened doors for more and more commodification of higher education and heavy capitation fee being charged by the private universities. That is one bone of contention. Knowledge Commission report in 2007 also talked about upgrading the standards of colleges and universities in the rural areas, in the Mufussil areas. I think that needs much more attention. World Trade Organization in 2000 came up with the intellectual property regime, general agreement on trade and services, that is also is very, very disadvantageous to so many developing countries, and lot of a great uproar had taken place that it is only 200 universities in the world which are monopolizing the higher education market and everything. Only 5 publishing houses are monopolizing the publishing market, so much so that even authors are not allowed to get complimentary copy, or they don't even have access to soft copy. So that kind of a centralization of knowledge is taking place, and then the rest of the world will be just creating only foot soldiers. UGC directive of 1/4 of the syllabus of each course must be accessed online, and in teaching learning 40% of must be done in a virtual classroom and e-resources on MHRD portal. That itself has also created lot of, because so many children have dropped out of colleges and schools. Those who were in junior college, they have given up because they don't have access to this kind of a platform based sources. With onslaught on education technology infrastructure, do we want to homogenize classroom teaching, or do we want more and more creative and critical reflection and pluralism in understanding of the same problem? Because that is, plurality is very, very important. Indians are known to be argumentative, and we have a long tradition of plurality in educational knowledge construction. Will that remain if we just totally focus on education? Can chimera of tech-savvy process produce inclusive pedagogy? Are not we privileging product over process? Is online education a Trojan horse that has been transported by to the Indian education system from abroad? Who is benefiting from this education technology? Which are the international companies which are they're getting billions and billion dollars of profit? So these are the questions which have come up. Nothing can, but on the whole, we can say that nothing can replace an autonomous agency of teacher, as a teacher is a facilitator, counselor, mentor, and guide to the student. Online teaching learning makes student passive observer, not an active participant. Lack of human contact generates boredom, and for effective learning, face-to-face interaction is crucial. So that is the general consensus that has emerged. Now, question of digital divide is also discussed in the context of national education policy, that when only 8% of school-going children have internet connectivity, how will one nation, one digital platform for school education be accessible to children of marginalized section? Use of radio, use of podcast, use of special e-content for visually and hearing impaired people, that is need of an hour. Manodarpan, an initiative to provide psychological support and counseling to students, teachers, families for mental health and emotional well-being, which was launched on 17th of May by the Union Finance Minister, Dr. Nirmala Sitharaman. And also the Diksha scheme, digital infrastructure of knowledge sharing platform for education and training through private DTH, direct to home operators like Tata Sky and Airtel, to air educational video content and enhance reach of the knowledge. These have come under the coronavirus pandemic induced lockdown. Now, teacher can access, assess, create and upload digital resources through Diksha. But will the children of marginalized section, who are poor, SC, ST, minorities, even girls, if there is only one smartphone in the house, and that's what we are seeing in Bombay currently, most of the NGOs working in the community, they are complaining that even when we have distributed one smartphone per household, the smartphone goes to boy. Girl has been dropped out. She has now become either a child labor, and parents are planning to send her back to the native place for marriage. So states with limited internet connectivity, and it is not only the problem of rich or poor, even the people who can afford the platform. But if there is a limited digital connectivity, internet connectivity in that particular region, in so many tier 2, tier 3 cities, or in the Mufassil places, or in so many states of India, how are students going to learn through digital platform? Contemporary challenges in higher education, at one level we are talking about, we are facing the challenge of upgradation of institutional infrastructure to complement teacher education, facilitation, mentoring and constructivist approach that is there. Sharing of internet-based resources, that is also very important issues. Blended learning, Gujarat has started now a mobile Wi-Fi, they have started mobile Wi-Fi connectivity, which is like they move throughout the community, different communities, and students can use the Wi-Fi facility, and accordingly the classes are arranged. No, this kind of a stopgap arrangements have been made, but we will have to think in terms of a long term and a very sustained intervention in this regard. Blended learning, a style of education in which students learn via electronic and online media, as well as the traditional face-to-face teaching. I think many of the institutions have adopted this model for this year at least, and I think educational B.Ed degrees always for past 5-7 years they have been talking about the flipped classroom and blended learning. The affirmative action for bridging the gap for students from the marginalized section, so that we addressing the digital divide becomes a major challenge currently. And what we need is a broadband connectivity, that means the last mile connectivity is very important. Online resources in mother tongue, they are very important. So e-textbooks and e-reference books, so many state governments have uploaded e-textbooks and e-reference books, and even Bombay Municipal Corporation has now, from yesterday, they started even online classes for primary school, 6 to 11, this thing, and they have also allotted different time for different subjects and different classes. Education from transformative change, which is the mandate of the new national education policy, which demands the process of deep, constructive, and meaningful learning that goes beyond simple knowledge acquisition and supports critical ways in which learners consciously make meaning of their lives. I think that's what has been emphasized in the policy. And it also talks about the integration of skill training in existing educational program, regional specific agro-based educational program. The critique that the policy neglects the rural areas, the focus is more on the urban. Creation of learning center, which has been a long-standing demand. Even when the policy was at a draft stage, so many rural colleges had said that they needed more and more learning centers in the rural areas with the state-of-the-art quality education. So the why should only students from Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, or Bangalore and Hyderabad benefit of the latest state-of-the-art in education? Why not students in Mufassil areas? Now at least technology and the platform based education has made it possible. So if you see the profile of women in higher education institution, major challenge is access and participation at undergraduate level, because after 12th comes the major chunk of women are dropped out. Institutional good practices for gender equity in higher education, that means 30% reservation of girls. Maharashtra was the first state to come out with this policy of 30% reservation in engineering colleges way back in 1991. There was a tremendous anger from the boys, but now at least this is the state with highest number of women engineers in the country. Okay, so this kind of affirmative action, at one stroke of pen, you create a ecosystem which is opening the doors for women. Earlier, engineering college was a bastion of only boys. Same with the IITs we have, but still IITs have hardly 17% girls as students. So women graduates and they and the decision making. So systematically making an effort to induct women into decision making bodies where they have a say in policy positions, mandated power, and not only a symbolic power. Because generally, even when one or two women are taken in the decision making body, they are just asked to keep quiet. They are there only as a decorative piece. The moment they open their mouth, they are asked to bring coffee or they are asked to bring sandwich. That kind of attitude should not be there. And that's why critical minimum theory, which talks about 30% decision making power in the hands of women, so that you are in a cluster. When you are in a group, then you can assert. One or two women can be witch hunted or silenced, or her character assassination, that she's a bulldozer or she's too aggressive, that can be done. But when there are a group of women demanding, then the gender sensitive measures, then it is possible. Cultural barriers affecting women, I think that needs to be changed with the change in the mindset. And also strategies for the new millenniums, we have to come out. And when it comes to affirmative action, the equal opportunities offered in circumstances of inequalities of endowment and environment will only perpetuate existing pattern of inequality. So treating everyone equally is also wrong, because all of them have a very, very different kind of hurdles. So according to the impediments and disabilities, which are socio-economic, cultural disabilities which are created, we need to come up with the affirmative action. So I think affirmative action strategies to reduce inequities of access generally have a bad name. And I think those who talk about only marriage, they are totally insensitive to affirmative action. And I think we should not be prey to that. So the need of an hour is for the state is to provide women with solid foundation in mathematics and science subjects, and also several bridge courses, so that SNDT was the first one in India to start this kind of an entry. Like any woman who was 25 plus and who would appear for the aptitude test, they call it common entrance tests, and could do the bachelor's and master's from curriculum, from the correspondence course, they used to call it at that time. So that was very important. And for that, you have a brief courses, contact lectures and all. Free sheet scholarships and degrees in vocational education, because we consider vocational education as inferior and only the general, the pedagogy based education as this thing. So that kind of a divide should go. Discourage the system of tracking students into arts and science streams at a secondary level of education. Give them exposure to all streams of knowledge, which even the policy talks about. Provide childcare facilities as institution of higher learning. So crash facility, there should be special budget should be allocated for the crashes, because so many married girls, married women, they come to the higher education institution. Currently, we have a crash in JNU and TISS for both students as well as teachers. But I think this model has to be, it is a best practice and it should be emulated. In situation where particular fields of study have to be pursued in another country, create a special funding for married women so that their spouse can accompany them. So I think that is very Commonwealth fellowship, which you have postdoctoral fellowship, where the spouse can join the woman. But elsewhere we don't have, and I think we need to do that. So, and especially in the science stream, so many women who had to continue their studies after MSc, they had to continue, or even after PhD, they had to continue their research because of marriage and maternity. But if we make this kind of a special funding, then it is possible. Provide a means through which issues of gender inequality can be addressed both formally, so formal structures like a women development cell, and also informally, that should be institutionalized in and currently we have seen the gender sensitization program throughout the country have started in all 700 universities because of the directive of MHRD. So the challenging task that we are facing is the decision-making role of women in higher education. So more principals, more vice chancellors, more registrars, more deans who are women and who are sensitive to especially proactively, who would proactively draw more and more women into higher education institution is very important. And expansion of gender dimension in educational curriculum is very important, that not only in higher education, but at all levels, we have to create a mindset of gender equality, sensitivity to the transgender community, LGBTQIA community, no exclusion principle, but everywhere the inclusive policy that we have to create. And also positive discrimination in favor is called for in general, while the emancipation of subaltern women requires priority over protecting the elite women's interests. That is also another strong message that came 3 days back. There was a Periyar Day, and Dr. Sukhdev Taurat, Professor Sukhdev Taurat was talking about contribution of Periyar, and how he said that we need positive discrimination to get women, more and more women into higher education. And the private domain of personal interest, that should not be the concern, but if there was a public domain of universalism. So universal access to higher education is the demand of the day. And access to tertiary employment after completion of higher education. Even we should think like in placement cell, special emphasis should be given for gender inclusivity. And gender responsive budgeting is very important. The gender economist from 2001 have been doing the work of monitoring the budgetary allocation. And also Australia was the first country in 1984. They started gender responsive budgeting as a result of the demand of college going girls. And India adopted as a policy in 2004, and currently lot is being done. So while dealing with the privatization of education, we need to address some crucial mind-boggling issues regarding role of education per se, and when it comes to, and also specifically for the gender dimension, that what is the goal of the education? Is it to create concerned and informed citizenry, or to meet the expected future need of economic and social development of the country, or simply to meet the labor requirement of economic globalization, or can a balance be achieved between all these three previous aims? So the lofty goals of national education policy can be realized only when we answer these mind-boggling questions by treating education as a public good. It should be universally accessible, not as a commodity. It is not should be left to the market. Markets are socially constructed. Markets are segmented. Markets can be very, very harsh with those who are at the margin. So the crucial role of the state to ensure inclusive education is very important, with the three broad outcomes of excellence in higher education are envisaged as contribution to economic growth and India's competitiveness in the world, important improvement in the social equity, that is more and more inclusivity, and also enlightened citizenship, very important. We want to create a responsible, enlightened, gender sensitive citizen, and also the poverty alleviation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
Vaishali Joshi.
Most welcome.
I'm Vaishali Joshi from Sociology Department.
Yeah,
And,
yes. Hello. Yeah.
For such a elaborate, insightful session and for elaborating on the major features, major focus areas, and also raising major issues and challenges for inclusive education in terms of gender. So actually in the chat box, people have, raised questions, but they've written almost paragraphs. So in fact, now we make the session open for deliberations and questions. So let us just go through the questions, because as I said, there are many questions. And you can also ask. Okay, so we can take this question. There is Ushwinder Popli. Are having policies in place good enough for effective implementation? What ways do you see to have practically implementing the NEP in terms of gender? Ma'am, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think one affirmative action can be the way Maharashtra did, no, 30% of, and even in Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, we also have affirmative action that 30% of Sarva Shiksha budget has to be, the beneficiary have to be girls, okay? And only after that we saw, otherwise what happened in so many Midnapur studies of West Bengal showed that in an area where even everyone was honest, there was no corruption, there was no leakage, MP and MLA were also very honest, they implemented, very judiciously they implemented the policy, but still what was found in that Santhal tribal communities was that all the boys were in school and they were replaced by their sisters as child labor. So that should not happen. So I think first affirmative action has to be gender inclusivity in every way, not only in the curriculum designing, there also gender inclusivity, financial allocation, gender, say how many schools, the way NAC does the NAC audit, no, in the NAC visit, they do the gender audit, financial audit, safety audit. Same way we have to have at every stage, right from the students to the teachers to people in the decision making body, and also liberal financial allocation. So that is very important. The political will that we have shown about Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, like nobody is cribbing. Currently, I don't see anybody cribbing about 2% professional tax that we are paying for. Every working person in India at source is paying for support to Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. So that kind of emotional maturity, all of us have gone. Why should we pay for someone's education? No, we want responsible citizenship, and that's why Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan is very important. Same mindset we will have to bring so far as the higher education is concerned. So I think that is very important. And gender sensitivity, that means not all those who are marginalized, not only girls, but also the transgender community. Only 2 states have responded. What about the rest of the states? They also need to have support. And these are the children who are abandoned by their biological families. So state will have to do even more. So their hostels, their fees, their extra coaching, learning centers, if they are from the neglected areas where there is no culture of education, because education doesn't come automatically. You through generation it comes. So to have this uneven and combined development, we need to make intensive intensive investment in terms of learning centers, extra coaching, bridge courses, courses. And for all that, what we need is both education infrastructure as well as education financing. So that is very important. And what it says that about the philanthropic public partnership, To what extent it will work, I think, because that 2% of profit which Fortune 500 companies are using as CSR fund, will it actually come to higher education? Because most of the CSR fund, as it is written in the Ambani Birla plan, Ambani Birla white paper in 2004, corporate world also sees only education up to 12th standard as a merit good. They said higher education should be only for the market user fee. So I think in that context, role of the state becomes very important. State has to increase its funding for higher education.
Thank you, ma'am. Anita Banerjee is asking that what should be the role of a teaching teachers or teaching professionals? What should be our role in this change?
Yeah. I think first of all, if 200 foreign universities are going to enter
Ma'am,
Indian
please, could you please speak a little louder, ma'am?
Yeah. If 200 foreign universities, we have opened India has opened the door for 200 excellent universities in the world, in India,
Yes.
to the Indian market, and Indian students will also now explore more possibilities. So I think lot of weeding out will also take place. So I think we will have that whole approach of the national education policy of a lifelong learning, that we will have to continuously learn. And we have seen in last 6 months of lockdown, most of us are constantly attending courses and collecting certificates and exposing ourselves to so many new subjects like machine learning and artificial learning and massive online courses and Harvard HED and Yale University's webinars, and people are constantly learning. So I think teachers will have face lot of so that whole previous generation of ours, which used the notes which they had made during their student days. No, there is a joke that so many teachers celebrate silver jubilee of their notes because for past 25 years they have used the same notes. That will not do. You will have to continuously upgrade your knowledge. You will have
Ma'am, one question. Ma'am,
Yeah.
how do we, as a teacher, how do we try to remove this gender disparity? How do we draw the girl students, just motivating them? New education policy, I agree. But what is it that will
But
really, because even
I
now,
think-
if you go to at the household level, there is wide discrimination. Everybody, I mean, it still persists, even in highly educated urban households. So how
Yeah.
do we as teachers try to
Yeah, I
bridge
think
the
first of all, currently we have seen under lockdown, it is only the NGOs which are distributing this thing, what you call smartphones, and they have
Yes.
collected smartphones, they are taking them out, and they are also giving them
Yes.
computer pads, to the students. I think we all will have to, so far we have done only book banks. For the poor children, we used to only have a book bank. So I think we will have to now have computer bank, and we'll have to have a smartphone bank that is there, and also separate fund for recharging also, because even where the smartphones are distributed, people don't have money to recharge their this thing, because the choice is between whether to buy vegetable or pay money for recharging, or whether to buy grain or for so
Exactly.
that is the kind of deprivation that we have. So I think we will have to be more proactive, and I think India has a very huge middle class, around 40 crore middle class are there. So I think we have to sensitize them, and when we set the example, money attracts money. So when we start doing something, people also join us. So that will be the effort as individual, as a teacher, but we also will have to ask for the macro policy. It is not only the what you set an example by your sacrifice, that is very important, but at the same time, our macro policies also will have to be more inclusive. So we will have to talk about more funding to the aided institutions where the students from marginalized sections come, the affiliated colleges in the Mufasil areas where the students from marginalized sections come. So I think that their funding has to be increased for the education infrastructure. Okay, because teachers are getting 7th pay salary, but what about the education infrastructure? The education infrastructure that has to be increased. More learning centers will have to be created. More free Wi-Fi centers will have to be created so that students can use this online platform. If Corona is going to stay in a post-COVID reality, let us there also. I think the way in which the economy is reorganizing itself, even the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan funding is also going for rehauling of the industry. MSMEs are also using machine learning, artificial intelligence. They are using They are using new technology. So there is an onslaught of automation. So I think the students will have to gear themselves to, will have to be prepared. And girls are missing the bus. Now also in Stand Up India, Startup India, Make in India, where are the girls? In industrial, we have 300 industrial training institutes. Why are they giving only 2 skills to girls, tailoring and screen printing? All other 200-300 types of courses which are there in different states, they are only boys are getting. So we are making boys ready for the new economy, future of economy, industry 4.0. Girls are not happening. With girls, it is not happening. So we'll have to be really very proactive in making them job ready, preparing them for the new future jobs. As it is, the work participation rate has gone down to 23%. In 2000, we had 40% of Indian women were in the workforce. Now we have only 23% of them are there. Other data says it's 17%. ILO says it is 23%, which is very deplorable. And it only in 2 countries it is happening. Only India and Pakistan, and some Middle Eastern countries among the affluent groups. Everywhere work participation is increasing throughout the world. Only in these countries it is going down. So we have to give major
Thank you, ma'am.
responsibility. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
We are skipping few questions because ma'am has already elaborated on them. Now, Dr. Meera is asking that in the new education policy, what could be the prospects and challenges for Institute of Development Studies or Center for Women's Studies?
I think these are the areas. I think 2 approaches are there. One is a mainstreaming gender concerns in all disciplines. Plus, it also talks about 50% foundational course, which is common to all students, which is about the value education. So, through value education, through on ethics, constitution, so constitutional morality. So, I think that is one approach of taking women's studies there instead of just ghettoizing women's studies in one particular center, which has no mandatory power. No, so they do their research. Research gathers does. So one is a mainstreaming, which SNDT has done. You have seen TISS, many universities have done. But gender concerns and women's studies is mainstream. Every discipline has its own paper on women's studies: sociology of women, psychology of women, gender in history. Women's studies in social work is there. And second one is that Women's Studies Center with a mandate of teaching their special MA in Women's Studies or master MPhil is gone, and bachelor's in Women's Studies. Several universities, around 15-20 universities in India have these programs. And also documentation center, archives, because knowledge construction has to be there, research, and also the how to combine research and how does it translate into policies, programs, and action. So that is the mandate which Women's Studies Center have. And these are, we have seen that last 10 years, after 12th plan, we have seen there is no funding. They are just kept on oxygen. So most of the Women's Studies Center, Human Rights Education Center, Center for Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusion, these 3 centers have really faced tremendous neglect, and after a lot of lobbying they managed to get 6 months extension. So I think this situation has to go. One thing which the new education policy talks about, introduction of women's studies at the bachelor's level. So that means in the bachelor's program, women's studies will be included. Earlier it was just at a master's and this thing. But I think continuous pressure has to be built, because women's studies, when national education policy talks about transformative education, women's studies is a one discipline which starts, the premise of which is based on transformational education. The challenging the gender inequality and creating a society based on equity and also equality among all genders. That is the premise on which women's studies exist. So I think that that has to be given special focus, which and for that we have to continuously build the pressure. Indian Association for Women's Studies, I'm an executive committee member of that. That has been doing, that is the platform which has 144 women's studies centers of the universities, Indian universities, and they are building the pressure and negotiating with the University Grants Commission. But the pressure will have to be continued.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Few questions are slightly ambiguous. Once again, I'm skipping those. Those, if they are participating, they are still online, they can ask themselves. But there is one question from Ivan John, and he is asking what role, related to women's studies but slightly different, what role can women's colleges play? Because many a times the women's colleges themselves are steeped into prejudices against women.
Yeah, that is true. I think the women's colleges, which played once upon a time, played a very progressive role in the 19th century, early 20th century, where the access to higher education was not available. It was not there for girls. Okay, they played a historically very important role. But so many of the women's colleges have become fossilized, and they also have become more of a centers of moral policing for the girls. No, curtailing the creativity. I think that has to go. So I think gender sensitization is not only for mixed colleges or a co-education institution. It is equally important. All of us have a patriarchal baggage. I always have a constant fight with my daughter because her concept of liberty for women and autonomy for women is very different, okay, than that of a mine. And she said, Mama, you are a feminist of the 70s. You always talked about certain about women's equality and liberty, and why do you put restriction on me? So this tug of war is always going to be there between the generations, especially when it comes to the rules about the hostel, what kind of freedom and autonomy the girl students have. Why do we have a different timings for, there is a big study done of the women's hostels in our country, and that shows that the timing, boys can come up to even at 10 o'clock. There are no restriction of boys for entry and exit from the campus, while for the girls, even in the progressive states, for certain states also, the study shows that at 6 o'clock, the main door of the girls' hostel is locked. In so many places where feminists were invited to give lecture, and then they were. I think this one Meenakshi Gopal has written article also in Indian Express about that. She is the one who wrote, who was the chairperson for the report after Nirbhaya tragedy, the report, Saksham report. If you read the Saksham report, in that also they have written that why do we use the double standard of sexual morality? That boys have all the freedom and the girls have to be restricted. So I think that also has to go, and we have had so many experiences of universities in which girls have gone on a strike. There is a strong Pinjra Tod movement also. So I think most important thing is that girls' role in the decision-making body. That is very important. Taking them into confidence, discussing with them that when we say that you have to come before the dark, it is not from the angle of morality, but it is an angle of safety. There are so many issues, or we don't say that you don't come late at night, but you go in a group, because there is always a strength in number. So cluster approach is very important. If the environment is unsafe, then the cluster approach is important. When I was studying in a very, very progressive school, it was compulsory for girls to go for tailoring and boys for they had to opt for technology. So that is also currently happening in so many institutions. That has to be fought against. So many girls' colleges are averse to promote STEM subjects. So that also at a curricular level, we have to also challenge that why should we just churn out only BA BComs among girls? So at a pedagogical level, at an operational level, in terms of rules and regulation, in terms of moral policing, I think everywhere. So the most important thing with the women's colleges need to have is a democratic governance. Once you have a democratic governance and you allow everyone to vent out their anger, something may be positive. I have seen, like I was in SNDT, and when I was in decision-making body, one had to hear so many unpleasant things as a campus in charge. Okay, but then you can't penalize them. You give sympathetic hearing. You try to explain to them what are the consequences, and then you come up with the solution. Like we had a problem of a man flashing just in front of our gate, and girls stopped coming to the class. And after so much of probing and contacting them on phone, we realized that the girls were not coming because of this thing. And what we suggested, that we called these girls, I said, please come together. And now next time it happened, first of all, walk wherever you go, you coordinate your movement. And they started doing that. And still that man was flashing. Then we asked them that all of you have your smartphone. Just all of you take out your smartphone, you pretend as if you are taking his picture, and you'll go away. But this could happen only because we were discussing, because the girls, they feel in higher education, if we tell anything to our parents, they will stop our education. There is no democracy, and especially girls, those who are going in the girls' college. First of all, there is a lot of monitoring happening on them, and because they have not been allowed even to go to, those who have been in co-ed school are also forced to go to girls' college because they don't want interaction between boy and girl. So you can imagine, at a family level, at a home front, they are facing so many restrictions. So at least to compensate for the restriction they are facing in their family life, at least in the college, can we create a democratic space? Can we take up any controversial issues about which let there be open debate? So many times democracy solves the problem. It is a long time consuming exercise, but I think we need to be democratic. If we come up with the rules, they are going to be subversive. They are going to be more violent. They are going to be secretive with us. And they will also, like we know at the time of fish pond, what kind of fish pond they give to the teacher who is undemocratic and who is stern and who is always uses punitive measure. No? So I think we need to democratize ourselves when it comes to student-teacher relationship. It should not be a hierarchical relationship. It should be a friendly relationship.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? It's open. You're free to ask if there are any questions. It doesn't look like. No. There are many comments thanking you, ma'am, for the very insightful and informative session and the efforts that you've taken to conduct this session. But no more questions, I think. So
yeah, I think there's one that foundation, in all foundational courses, gender sensitization and gender integration of gender should be there. I think that even the policy talks about that in the foundational courses also we need to have a gender sensitization at our early child, right from the early childhood education.
yes.
Yeah, I also read the chat. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, then we come to the formal end of the webinar today.
Yeah,
And I take this opportunity to once again thank you, ma'am, so much for this wonderful, insightful, informative session. I take this opportunity to thank Manju Nijani, ma'am, without whom this webinar wouldn't actually have been possible. I thank our principal, Dr. Gulshan Kidwani, who supports in all our endeavors all the time. And I am deeply grateful to all the participants. And you can see the participant list. They've all joined from all across India, and there are participants also from Andaman and Nicobar. So huge overwhelming response that we've got from the participants. So thank you each one for participating, joining. And in the chat box, we've actually shared a feedback link. So please send your feedback. It would be really very helpful for us in our future activities. So thank you once again, ma'am. Thank you all. Thank you.
We finished on time.
Yes. Well written. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It was a very, and like I thoroughly enjoyed, and I got to meet so many of my friends from all over India. To see them, to see their name is really quite elevating. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Very good.